reading over here.
Yeah, girl, I'm trying to read the Miseducation of Negro.
So what do you think about it? Is it a good book?
Yeah, it's really good actually. I mean, if you ever get the chance, you should read it.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, I was about to do that, girl.
You know I like a good read, girl.
So, this book, it summarizes a whole. It makes us think more in depth about the unjust inequities, about our nation and all the years previous and whatever. We were always placed beneath society, you know, and so that has destroyed our opportunities and our self-identity and self-worth.
What else
you
like
say
about it?
you say you ain't never read this book, or you have?
No, I think I started. I read a little bit, but it's been a while for one of my African American lit classes. Yeah.
Oh, what chapter you read when you did read?
Well, most of the book, but we did it in like little sections.
All right, so
a lot of like some of the quotes and stuff like that.
So what part? Like, tell me what part. What was it about that you read?
What I got out of it, we just talk about. Say I started at the beginning to see the trouble. You know, African Americans, they've always had trouble. Ever since we came to this country, we've had trouble. You know, Carter G. Woodson, you know, he was arguing about how African Americans, they really need to be more cognizant of their culture, some of the good things that black people have done. They act like blacks have never done anything important in this country. You know, they act like whites have done it all, right? And so he just argues, he was arguing in chapter 1, you know, about how blacks need to realize that they're not inferior. The white man always tried to make us as a race feel like we was less than and inferior and things like that. And that's what I was getting out of chapter 1.
Okay, well, I just want to read you this quote, and I want to know, like, do you feel like the same way I feel about this quote?
Okay.
So, Carter G. Woodson, he has stated that the same educational process which inspires and stimulates the oppressor with the thought that he is everything and has accomplished everything very well, he presses and crushes at the same time to spark the genius in the Negro by making him feel that his race does not amount to much and never will measure up to the standards of other people. That's on page XXX of the preface. Okay. And so I believe that this quote basically says that the same thing that should be building us up, such as education, is the same thing that's slowly bringing us down in the world. And it does not make us feel at ease with the rest of society. And then we wound up falling into the trap that society has already dug with us.
Right.
And then it always winds up making us feel like we can never amount to being anything other than what society has painted a picture of us, you know what I'm saying?
Right, and it's always the wrong picture.
Yes.
It's just like when you go back in history with Carter G. Woodson, when he wrote the book back in the 30s, you know, the world looked totally different then.
Right.
Most of the schools, they only taught European history and everything. So that's how they really got into, well, that's not how it all started. It goes further back than the 30s. But at the same time, through the education system, that's when they really started miseducating everybody. You know, they started miseducating everybody to try to act like blacks were inferior, blacks didn't know anything, that, you know, they could never be educated on a level of somebody white. And Carter G. Woodson, if I remember correctly, it was page 4 of chapter 1. He was talking about that, and he was like, these schools have miseducated students, you know, by teaching that African Americans and those of African heritage were intellectually inferior. And I really don't agree with that.
Oh, you don't?
I don't agree with that
at all.
Because look, we are all Virginia State students, we scholars, you know what I'm saying? Hey, there's plenty of white students go to our school. I've gone to college at a white school. And I'm always the top of my class. So, but you know, African Americans, they used to pull together you know, to try to make the
Hey
race build
y'all,
up
what y'all
together.
doing?
Hey.
What y'all talking about?
Hey. Yeah, so we were sitting around here discussing the book that she was reading by Carter G. Woodson, the Miseducation of the Negro. So we were talking about how everything in our education system has changed so much when we wrote that book back in the 30s.
Yeah, a lot has changed.
And and I was telling her how much blacks used to pull together, you know, to try to get ahead as a group, you know what I'm saying? But, you know, everything had changed when he wrote the book. Most of the African Americans, they had to develop their own schools, like Virginia State and other historical black universities, and most of the teaching was from white people, and they were only teaching European history. So we look at how we are today, everything has changed. You know, blacks, they get their education, and a lot of them don't go back to their community and help nobody. You know, it's like the have against the have-nots. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I read a chapter. It was called How We Missed the Mark, and it was how Woodson was so upset with how the education was for black children and adults in the 20th century. So he felt as though that they needed education such as like philosophy, science, religion, and history. And he also felt as though they needed like industrial skills such as like carpentry, sewing, and also knowing how to do industrial farming.
Yeah, the trades.
Yeah, and he also felt as though blacks should be able to build their talents and build up their communities also.
Yeah. That's excellent.
The part I read was talking about how we drift away from the truth, and it was saying how Woodson felt that the white people felt that they were more superior because they were taught their contributions to American society when it came to history, science, and literature, whereas the Negroes, they weren't taught anything. They were kind of deprived of their history. So I just felt like it's unfair, and we were never taught that growing up, so it's kind of true. And now that we go to HBCU, it's like way different than what I was taught in predominantly.
Right.
Yeah,
Do you like going to the historical black university better?
I do, because when I was in high school, I went to a predominantly white school, and everybody was pro-white. Like, we didn't learn anything about African Americans or African people in general. And I was like one of 5 African Americans, and it's just so different. Like, at a HBCU, I know so much more about where I come from and who I am. So, yeah.
Yeah, didn't even learn half of this in school, so it's still like a shock that all of this really happened. Like, I'm surprised I didn't learn this in school. Like, why would they keep doing that?
Yeah, it's all by design. It's all by design. But you know what? We know all about them.
Sure.
They got to
They
catch
know
up and learn
everything.
about us. Yeah, but girl, it's getting dark out here. We've been out here talking. We've been out here probably an hour before y'all even showed up.
Really?
But yeah, so I'm getting ready to go.
It's getting cold.
You got no clothes on.
I'm gonna get her a ride.
I'm about to go.
All right, y'all. Good to see y'all. All right.
Hey y'all.
Hey, what are you talking about?
Just the miseducation of the Negro.
Oh, yeah. So let me tell you, we have a presentation tomorrow. I've been working on something about this book too. So, you mind if I read y'all a little something?
No, go ahead.
Alright. It says, in chapter 4, page 24, the Negro will never be able to show off his originality as long as his efforts directed from without by those who socially proscribe him. Such friends will unconsciously keep him in the ghetto. This is stating that the education and the future of the Negro remains in the hands of the whites. In past, in order for some Negro colleges to move forward, they had to have the desired educators in order to keep up with BWIs. At the same time, white staff did not participate freely in the life of a Negro. This contributed to most of us African Americans who are miseducated about ourselves. We felt inferior in terms of going forward, so we ignored what we should have been taught from the beginning. It is also written that the emphasis is not to stress for separation of systems, but for instructors to come to a common sympathy for those they instruct. Woodson also states on page 24 that one can give out these things or devise an easy plan for doing so, then is an educator. In a nutshell, it's not what you teach, it's how you teach it. People should want to inspire and make a life better, but education given to Negroes in colleges and universities is always that you become But if a Negro is forced to live in the ghetto, he can still work for a change in that community. Some try to go above the so-called status quo, while others remain in the background, afraid that there is no way for them to even compete, causing us to fight each other and try to rise about one another without, instead of, helping each other out. In terms of African Americans administrating our colleges and universities, chances to build were slim to none. Once the school became financially in distress, they basically shut them down, saying that there was basically no way for them to even try. So it's almost like their efforts, or for them to even leave, did not even happen.
The failures of the Negro businessman are not due to the troubles within the business, but the lack of common sense. So, which I think.
Girl, you did fine.
What do y'all?
No! Chill! Chill!
Like, what the hell is
She was like, bro.
What's going on, y'all? I'm sorry.
Just
I
going
had to.
over.
I had
I'll
to.
be cool with you.
Y'all sound like y'all was actually into it.
We have a presentation in our room.
miseducation in the Negro?
You need to read this book.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
So actually, I did read it. Y'all read chapter 6?
Yeah.
We read the whole book.
Did you read chapter 6?
Yeah, I read chapter 6. That's the one that actually
Tell me
came
about
out.
it.
Actually, chapter 6 is pretty much talking about how the educated Negroes stop going to church. I don't know where everybody else from, but I mean, church is usually the center of the community where everybody would become family. At least back in the old days, where everybody would come to each other, help each other out.
Yeah.
But it seems like nowadays you have some churches out here that's more so trying to get after money and not actually care about you. You know how they always
The
saying,
fancy cars.
yeah, half of them have fancy cars. You see someone struggling on the street and they don't want to come out and help them, brother. So Woodson was trying to get in here saying how educated blacks are not even returning back home to their own church. They moving on to, like, say, the predominantly white church. And like, I remember this one part of the book where he said that King Henry VIII, he split off from the English church just because he was tired of getting sanctioned by the church because he was messing with a bunch of women. So half the people don't even know what's going on. So, for real, I mean, Woodson, what he's trying to say, he's saying like that he used a term that was explaining the top 10 percentile of blacks in education they supposed to be from. He's pretty much telling them, hey, why don't you come home? Because you know how much power it would be for them to come home and help the church, and then you helping other people in that community go up, and then we have our own kind of power.
Right.
We can control everything. You know, and that's actually what Woodson was trying to say, that the church is pretty much the only thing that we have. The church is the only thing we actually control. I mean, that's pretty much what I got out of it. That was the more important part for me. I mean, that's why I'm sitting here walking around. It was
So get your
actually,
thoughts together.
yeah, I was trying to actually see what he was trying to do.
That was good. It was. That was really good.
Alright, so it's a little chilly out here. I think you're doing really good on your presentation, so don't stress about it.
But you got it. You got it. So I think I'm
You just got to stop scaring us.
So it was good to see
Thank
y'all.
you.
So we all got it.
I'm hungry.
I need some taco. Alright, y'all.
I need some tacos.
Hey, I'm gonna walk y'all home, alright?
Alright, thank
Hey y'all, I'm Bree and I did the preface.
I'm Ruby. I did chapter 1.
I'm Ashley. I did chapter 2.
I'm Jay, I did chapter 3.
Saray, chapter 4.
I'm Portia. I did chapter 5.
This your boy Kendall did chapter 6.
And we are the 7 scholars.